It's great to have Ashok, and he's going to talk about d-instanton amplitudes in string theory.
Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Okay. So the talk today will be on d-instanton amplitudes in string theory. So let me begin by a general introduction. So in the conventional approach, a string amplitude with a given set of external states has one term at every loop order. Yeah, and in fact, this is advertised as one of the big achievements of string theory and it's given by an integral over the moduli space of a Riemann surface with punctures. And the reason that this is advertised as a big advantage is that it avoids having to sum over large number of Feynman diagrams. However, often these integrals run into divergences from the boundary of the moduli space. And so you cannot really try to evaluate them on a computer. But often, but not always, these can be tackled by analytic continuation in the external momenta. Okay, so you try to adjust the external momenta so that the amplitude is defined in some range of momentum, and then you analytically continue from there. But when this fails, then we need to take help of string field theory. And this is what I'll try to explain in the next slide. So first of all, what is string field theory? So string field theory is a regular quantum field theory with infinite number of fields. And the perturbative amplitudes are given by sum of Feynman diagrams like in ordinary quantum field theories. But string field theory is somewhat special in that the sum of Feynman diagrams can be reorganized into integration over the moduli spaces of Riemann surfaces. And the way this happens is that each Feynman diagram covers part of the integration region, okay, with the correct integrand. And when you sum over all the diagrams, you cover the full integration region. And in string field theory, there are no ultraviolet divergences because the interaction terms are exponentially suppressed at large Euclidean momenta. So the momentum integrals are all finite. Okay, and similarly, the sum over intermediate states, which are infinite in number, that sum is also finite because of this exponential suppression. So the divergences that we encounter in the worldsheet description appear as infrared singularities in the string field theory. And these are associated with the internal propagators going on shell. But as in any quantum field theory, we typically know how to deal with these cases. Because in quantum field theory, whenever an internal propagator goes on shell, that basically means that you are following the wrong procedure to do your computation. And quantum field theory also tells us how to rectify it. So these divergences can be handled using the standard techniques of quantum field theory. Yeah, and that's the reason why string field theory is used. So today we are going to apply string field theory techniques to address another problem in string theory, where similar divergences are present. And these deal with d-instanton amplitudes. So d-instantons are d-branes. Sorry, d-instantons are to d-branes, what ordinary instantons are to solitons in quantum field theory. So d-instantons uses Dirichlet boundary condition on open strings along all non-compact directions, including time, and possibly some compact directions. So this is the main difference between a d-instanton and a d-brane, because on a regular d-brane, you put Neumann boundary condition along the time direction. But on a d-instanton, you put Dirichlet boundary condition on the time direction because it's non-compact. And physically, d-instantons give non-perturbative contribution to string amplitudes. And these contributions are of order e to the minus some constant over gs, where c is some constant and gs is the string count. So let me now give a brief introduction to the problem that we face for d-instantons. So in principle, d-instanton contribution to the amplitudes can be computed using perturbative worldsheet methods. Because after all, it's ordinary d-branes with perhaps a somewhat strange boundary condition, but otherwise it's like ordinary difference. And the general structure of a d-instanton amplitude is given here. So first of all, you have this e to the minus c over gs. This is the suppression due to the exponential of the action. And then you multiply this by the sum over worldsheets, which includes those with boundaries. Okay, and on the boundaries, you put the d-instanton boundary. So effectively, what we have in the presence of d-instantons is the theory of open strings on the d-instanton and closed strings. Now, the problem that one faces in carrying out this program is that open strings on d-instantons carry zero momentum along the non-compact directions. And because of this, there is no variable in which you can carry out analytic contemplation. Because as I said earlier, you deal with the divergences in the worldsheet formalism by analytically continuing momentum. This you cannot do with the open strings that live on the d-instanton. And this is the reason why you need to use string field theory to extract sensible answers for d-instanton amplitudes. And we'll see this very explicitly as we proceed. So string field theory techniques have been applied to three classes of examples. And we have chosen these three classes of examples because in these examples, the answer actually is known from a dual description. So the first one is two-dimensional bosonic string theory. In fact, this is how the subject started in the modern days, okay, by the Harvard group. And the reason that it's useful is because here that answer is known from the matrix model. Okay, there is a dual matrix model description for two-dimensional bosonic string theory, which tells you what the d-instanton amplitude should be. The second example is d-instanton contribution to type 2b string theory amplitudes in 10 dimensions. And here the answer is known from S duality and supersymmetry. That if we believe in S duality and if we impose the constraints that supersymmetry implies, then you can predict what the d-instanton contribution should be. Okay, at least for a certain class of amplitudes, okay, not for all amplitudes. And a third example where it has been applied is d-instanton contribution to type 3 or TB string theory on Calabi-Yau three-folds. This is more recent work with Sergei Alexandrov and Bogdan Stefanski. And here the result is known again by a combination of mirror symmetry, S duality, and supersymmetry. And I should say that while these answers have been known for more than 20 years now, okay, both the matrix model answer as well as the result for d-instanton into type 2b string theory in 10 dimensions, the results for these, okay, were only finalized only recently, okay, recently meaning during the last few years, although it's a work done by many people over many years. And what we have found is that the string field theory techniques that I'm going to describe works in all cases. It's all the same techniques. And because of this, we can now trust these string field theory techniques and apply it to the cases where the answer is not known. For example, even in type 2b string theory in 10 dimensions, the S duality and supersymmetry can only tell you about certain class of contributions due to d-instantons. But there are plenty of others which are not predicted by S duality. And there you can now apply these string field theory techniques to extract the result. So here is some more detail on the d-instanton amplitudes. So as in any worldsheet description, the amplitude is proportional to gs to the minus chi, where chi is the Euler number of the worldsheet. The leading contribution to a given instanton sector comes from worldsheets with maximum chi, because you want to minimize the power of gs. And here is the description of the leading contribution to a d-instanton amplitude. This is irrespective of whichever theory you are considering, except of course in some cases it may vanish. Okay, and in that case you may have to go to the subleading order. So first of all, annulus, because it has zero Euler number, you can insert as many copies of the annulus as you like in the worldsheet, because it doesn't cost Euler number. Okay, then you can resum those contributions as exponential of the annulus diagram. And then the rest, leading order, is just the product of disk ampletures. Why? Because disk has Euler number 1. And so if you have, say, n external closed strings, you might as well try to gain Euler number 1 for each of the external closed strings by attaching each of the external closed strings on a disk. So the leading contribution comes from the product of disk ampletures. Now, what is somewhat peculiar, you can see, is that we have included disconnected worldsheet. Now, this, of course, is not unusual. You have to do this even in normal closed string amplitudes. Okay. Except that normally we don't include this because a given connected component of the worldsheet has separate energy momentum conservation. And so if you work at a generic point in the kinematic space, then only the connected diagrams come. But here what happens is that because of the Dirichlet boundary condition on the boundaries, the individual worldsheet amplitudes do not conserve energy or momentum. And because of this, the disconnected worldsheet contribution cannot be ignored. Okay? They contribute even at a generic point in the kinematic space because there is no energy and momentum conservation on individual disks or individual components of the worldsheet. And we'll see later how the energy momentum conservation is finally restored. So the disk amplitudes are not subtle, they are finite. Okay, sometimes they may be tedious to calculate. For example, in the analysis of type 2B on Calabi-Yau manifolds, most of the energy that we had to spend is for the calculation of the disk amplitudes. But these are standard worldsheet calculations. There are no divergences that you have to deal with. So at this order, all the subtleties are in this. Because as you will see, the annulus contribution is somewhat subtle. And physically, what this is describing is a one-loop determinant of the fluctuation of string fields around the instant. Okay, and that's what the exponential of the annulus diagram represents. And we'll see more explicitly how this is realized. So the general structure of the annulus amplitude I have given here. So this trace is over the states of the free string. So we have this integral. Okay, this is the integral over the modular parameter. So this trace is taken over states which are annulled by the B goes 0 mode. Okay, and this is just to soak up the goes 0 modes.
Ashok,
yes,
there's a question. 1 second.
Yes, please.
Hi, this is Daniel Jeffers.
Hi.
Question: what about the contribution from the disconnected disks that would give you something like the, the unshell action of the instanton? Do you
the disk, just the disk partition function you are saying?
Right. In other words, in addition to the annulus, why don't you have just the disk with no insertions?
Yeah. So those actually are trivially encoded in this e to the minus c over gs that I described. It's basically the resumming the disk with no insertions, you get this e to the minus c over gs.
Oh yeah, right. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I have not included those explicitly.
And I mean, is that something that can be computed, or it's something that's only determined?
No, we can compute it, because what you can do is that you can imagine that what you can compute is the change in this under a small change in GS, because that's like delete on 1 point function on the disk, which you can certainly call compute, and then you integrate this all the way from GS equal to 0 to the GS that you want.
I see.
Yeah, so this is certainly not put in by hand. You can compute it from the disk 1 point function.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are there other questions?
Not at this stage. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the general structure of the annulus. L0 is the standard Virasoro generator. This is in the open string sector. So this trace is taken over the open strings that live on the D instanton. Now this integral has possible divergences from the t equal to 0 end and t equal to infinity end. But in fact, one can show that if the closed string theory doesn't have tachyon, then there are no divergences from the t equal to 0 end, okay, because this is really the closed string channel. In other words, the bosonic and fermionic modes here cancel in pairs to make this integrand finite as t goes to 0. Now here you may wonder that how even in two-dimensional bosonic string theory, right, there are no fermionic modes, so what cancels it? So here I should just add that when you say this -1 to the f, this includes also the ghost states, okay, not just the physical bosons and fermions. So in two-dimensional string theory, for example, it is indeed true that there are no physical fermions, okay, in the open string spectrum, but there are ghost modes, okay, and those also have to be included. So there are no divergences from the p equal to 0. So because of this, we can just put an arbitrary cutoff epsilon here, okay, and do this integral. And assuming that the HB and HF are positive, okay, of course this is not going to be true, okay, but let's suppose that HB and HF are positive, okay, then this integral is perfectly well defined. We can do this integral, okay, and this is the answer that you get. Okay. And so exponential of the annulus amplitude is given by this expression over here. And we'll now analyze this a little more carefully. Okay, so here I have written that expression again, exponential of A. Now, clearly we can see that as long as HB and HF are all positive, then there is no problem. This is well defined, this is well defined. Okay, so this is an identity. For negative HB, the left-hand side, of course, is ill-defined because you have an exponentially divergent integral. But the right-hand side is still finite. Okay, this is in fact the analytic continuation of the left-hand side. Okay, you start from HB negative and then analytically continue. So you can still use the right-hand side to make sense of this integral. And maybe I'll say a little more about this later. Okay, in the context of two-dimensional string theory. But the problematic cases are the ones where HB or HF vanishes. And these are associated here, the both sides are divergent. Okay, this is in fact, sometimes you get 0 by 0, as we'll see soon. And the left hand side, of course, the individual terms diverge. So the remedy here is that we will now try to regard this first as path integral over open string fields, and then try to make sense of the path integral. Now, path integral here perhaps is not a very illuminating word, because we'll see that path integral, in fact, is a path integral over zero-dimensional quantum fields, because open string fields, because they have reached a boundary condition along all the non-compact directions, they really live in zero space-time dimensions. Okay, zero non-compact space-time dimensions. So what we are calling path integral, okay, will be just ordinary integrals or ordinary variables. And we'll see this explicitly. But we'll keep referring to this as path integrals. So we are now going to illustrate this procedure with the example of single instant on amplitude in type 2B and D equal to 10. But exactly the same procedure works for multi-instant on amplitudes and also for other theories, okay, and which I'll mention at the end. But the procedure I'm going to illustrate by this particular example. So here is the annulus amplitude again. This is the now in the context of 10-dimensional type 2B string theory. These are Jacobi theta functions. And you would notice that this in fact is identically 0, because the integrand actually vanishes by the theta function identity. In fact, theta 1 identically vanishes at the origin, and this sum is identically 0 because of the Jacobi identity. And this is in fact the result of cancellation between the Nebel-Schwarz and the Ramond sector open string states. Okay, the first two terms come from the Nebel-Schwarz sector, the second two terms represents the Ramond sector. Now, the fact that the integrand vanishes means that for L0 positive states, okay, we can trust this cancellation, there is no issue. Because we really have HB equal to HF pairwise and they cancel. But when HB and HF are 0, then you shouldn't trust this cancellation very much, because you have a form 0 by 0, right? E to the A is like 0 by 0, and 0 by 0 can be anything. So this is what we are going to deal with. But for the ease of keeping track of various factors, what we will do is that we will deform the problem by putting slightly shifted boundary condition on the two boundaries of the annulus. And the effect of this is to add a small constant h to the L0 eigenvalues that preserve conformal and BRST invariance on the worldsheet. Now, I should say this is not necessary, but we will see that this is a useful trick because this tells you how to go from string field theory to the worldsheet when there is no problem. And it also tells you where the problem arises when you actually set h equal to 0. So eventually we are going to set h equal to 0. Okay, but just to illustrate this procedure, it's best to keep h non-zero in the intermediate stage. Okay, so in the deformed system, after you have cancelled off all the massive modes, okay, which will have non-zero HB and HF even when you set h equal to 0, we are left with this integral. Okay, 8 bosonic and 8 fermionic modes. It's still 0. And now we are going to rewrite this as trivially as 10 minus 2 minus 8. Okay, and the reason for this will become clear soon. So then if we calculate e to the a, okay, by the formula that I showed earlier, you have h to the 8 square, h to the 8 and h to the 10 in the denominator. And the idea that at this level, we can now make connection with what you would get from open string field theory path integral on the DN set. And this is what you would get. Okay, this is what the open string field theory path integral would give. This is in fact the path integral in open string field theory in Siegel gauge. Okay, and I'll describe the gauge invariant form in a few minutes. So these fields actually now have physical interpretation. So the xi mu's are the trained Grassmann even modes, which are related to the gene central position. Okay, and we'll describe the precise relation in a few minutes. P and Q are still coming from the Nebel-Schwarz sector, okay, because that's this -2 over here. These are Grassmann odd modes, but that they represent the ghosts that we get from this gauge fixing. And chi alpha are the 16 Grassmann odd modes. These are the fermionic 0 modes, which are associated with broken supersymmetry. Okay, so d instanton breaks half of the space-time supersymmetries. So we have 32 supercharges to begin with, and we have broken 16. So there should be 16 Goldstino modes, and those are the chi alphas. And this is just an antisymmetric 16 by 16 Hermitian matrix, which squares to h times identity. Okay, so that after we integrate over chi alpha, you reproduce this square root of h to the 8. Okay, so now we make some observations, and we'll elaborate on this in the next slide. First observation is that e to the a, okay, this expression that we showed, okay, this expression, this can be interpreted as a Siegel gauge fixed path integral of open string field theory on the instant. In this interpretation, the modes P and Q represent Fourier-Popov ghosts. Now, and the Siegel gauge actually becomes singular in the h goes to 0 limit. And that's obvious by if you look at the kinetic term for the ghosts, right? Because in the h goes to 0 limit, the ghost kinetic term vanishes. And that's a clear signal that the gauge fixing procedure is breaking down, okay? Because the ghost kinetic term should be non-singular for a good gauge chance. So you already see the breakdown of the Siegel gauge, okay, but we will see it more explicitly in the next slide. So the remedy that we will follow is to not use the Siegel gauge fixed path integral. Once you have understood the connection, okay, or the origin, we will now go back to the original gauge invariant path integral before gauge fixing and try to make sense of that directly in the language of string field. And one thing that we will do is to get rid of the 0 modes P and Q from the integral, okay, because if we look at the gauge invariant path integral, of course, there are no ghosts. So let me first describe the gauge invariant path integral, and then we'll see how the gauge fixed result comes out. So here is the gauge invariant path integral. Okay, integration of the xi mu's you have already seen, chi alphas you have already seen. The only extra thing here is this mode phi. This mode, in fact, is what is fixed to 0 in the Siegel gauge. Okay, so Siegel gauge corresponds to choosing phi equal to 0. This is the action. Okay, the action has a form like this. I have written down. And you divide by the integral over the gauge volume of the gauge, right? This is what you normally start with in the quantum field. So I have already said phi is the extra field that is present in the gauge invariant action. Now, how does the gauge transformation act on these fields? So it acts on these fields by simply transforming phi to h times theta, and transforming xi9 by square root of h by 2 times theta. Now you see the 9 direction is somewhat special in this action, and that's simply because you have taken the shifted boundary condition between the two boundaries of the annulus to be along the 9 direction. Okay, the h was produced, if you remember, by putting slightly shifted boundary condition on the two boundaries, and that was done in the 9 direction. Okay, that's why the xi9 is special. So the Siegel gauge corresponds to setting phi equal to 0. And you see indeed that if you try to set phi equal to 0, then you pick up a Jacobian, which is h, right? Because you are changing variables from theta to phi. You pick up a Jacobian, which is h, and that's exactly what the Fourier-Popov determinant would have given. Right? If you do the integral over p and q, it reproduces factor of h. So everything is perfect as long as h is non-zero. But you can also see at this stage that if h is 0, then phi is gauge invariant. So you cannot fix phi to 0 using gauge transformation anymore. And that is what gave rise to the vanishing of the ghost candidate. So what you are going to do now is to go back to the original integral and work with this. Okay? Because when h is non-zero, then this is the same as the worldsheet answer. But now we can deal with this directly and set h equal to 0 and see what we get. If you set h equal to 0 in the action, this part vanishes, okay, because g square is h, so this vanishes. You are only left with 1/4 phi square. So that's what I have given here. Okay, so this, now we have gone back to h equal to 0, and this is the integral we have to deal with. Now you see that the phi integral is purely Gaussian. Okay, we can do this integral and we get an answer like this. And we can also see from here that if this is the action, this is the sole action that we have, then clearly there is no gauge transformation that can set phi equal to 0, right? It would have been wrong to set phi equal to 0, but that's what worldsheet seems to capture, okay? Because the worldsheet tries to do things very generally, okay? And sometimes it fails. And this is one case where the worldsheet fails. Okay, so now we have to deal with this. We are left with the xi and x chi alpha integrals. So I've already said earlier that xi mu's are related to the locations of the instanton in space-time. And we can find a precise relation by comparing the worldsheet result for the coupling of xi mu to a string amplitude. The xi mu's have come with definite vortex operators. And you compare that with the expected coupling of x mu, okay, which is actually the instanton position, to a string amplitude, because that dependence should come via to the ip dot x. That p is the momentum carried by the flow strings. So by comparing these two amplitudes, you can find the relation between xi and x. Similarly, the gauge transformation parameter theta can be related to the rigid U1 gauge transformation parameter, which I'll call alpha on the d instanton. So what is this rigid U1 transformation? So this in fact is the U1 that exists on any d-branes. And this basically is the fact that if you have an open string with one end on the d-brane, then the open string is charged under U1, and that's the U1 that you are talking about. Okay, so that open string just picks up a phase into the I alpha under this U1 transformation. And again, the relationship between theta and alpha we can find by comparing the string field theory gauge transformation and the rigid U1 transformation. So this is the result that one gets. The result between xi mu and x mu. So GO here is the open string coupling constant, whose relation to closed string coupling is given explicitly here. So you can convert the integral over xi mu into integral over x mu by this relation. And here is the relation between theta and alpha that one finds. So using this, you can convert the integral over theta, the volume of the gauge group that was in the denominator, into integral over alpha. And this integral can now be performed explicitly because alpha has period 2. Right? Because alpha was normalized, so the open strings ending on the d-brane picks up a phase of into the IR. So this integral just gives you 4 pi over g. So putting all this together, we can write this annulus amplitude, the exponential of the annulus, as this integral. And we are still left with this integration over the d instanton position and the fermion zero modes that are still supersymmetric. But these, of course, are collective modes of the instant. And as you know from any instant in calculus, the collective mode integration have to be done at the end after computing the full amplitude. Because if you are just calculating the exponential of the annulus amplitude, then this is all you have. But of course, that's not all you have, right? You have exponential of annulus multiplied by the disk amplitudes. And the disk amplitudes also depend on x, because x is the position of the d instant. So the way to do this integral now is to evaluate the disk amplitudes. And then at the end, you do this collective mode integration. So in particular, the x mu integral eventually generates this momentum conserving delta function. And the integration over the Grassmann odd variables, in fact, will vanish unless there are 16 insertions of chi alpha in the rest of the amplitude. So what we learned from here is that it's not enough to calculate just the product of disk amplitudes. We have to insert the 16 chi alpha 0 modes, 16 fermion 0 modes on as vertex operators on the disk amplitudes. Do that computation first. And then after that, you can do the chi alpha integral. Because when you do the chi alpha integral with these insertions, you get this factor of epsilon symbol. And that has to be contracted with the disk amplitude. So this part, as I said, is a somehow tedious calculation, but it's straightforward because there are no divergences. And at the end of all this, you precisely reproduce the Green-Booth-Pearl prediction that was made more than 20 years ago. Okay, with all the normalization factors, coupling constant dependence, everything correct. Now let me just say a few words about k instantons. So for k instantons, as before, we have to first unfix the Siegel gauge. As a result, we will get a k square extra 5 modes. We have to do the integration over those explicitly. Okay, these happen to be just Gaussian integrals. Okay, in the weak coupling limit. And then you have to divide by the volume of the UK gauge. And then in the numerator, you are left with a non-abelian integral. Okay, the abelian part, okay, can be treated exactly as before. They include the center of mass motion, okay, and the fermion 0 mode has to go of the with broken supersymmetry. Okay. But there is a non-abelian part of the integral in the numerator, which is non-trivial. But this actually becomes a supersymmetric matrix integral. Fortunately, it turned out that this had already been evaluated while studying the index for multiple D0 bands. It was evaluated in the late 90s, and we basically had to take the result and put these results together, and that exactly reproduce the leading term in the k instanton amplitude, again as predicted by Green and Booth. Now let me say a few words about the other cases. So as I said, the same method works for other cases as well. What differs is the actual number of bosonic and fermionic collective modes. For example, if you have type 2b on Calabi-Yau threefold, then we have 4 bosonic modes. Okay, and the instantons are typically d-brane wrapped on internal cycles of the Calabi-Yau. So typically for rigid cycles, you have 4 bosonic 0 modes, which correspond to motion in the transverse direction in the non-compact space-time directions, and 4 fermionic 0 modes because you are breaking 4 of the 8 supersymmetries. But otherwise, the calculation is similar, and the other complication is basically that you have to do the Calabi integration over the Calabi-Yau manifold, and that sometimes involves technical hardship. But as I said, there are no divergences that you have to deal with in those complications. So the exact Gaussian integration over the 5 modes in the numerator arises as before. And we have the division by the gauge group volume in the denominator, again as before. The only extra complication for 2-dimensional string theory is that we also have a tachyonic open string mode on the d instanton. And the way we deal with this is by treating the integration contour along steepest descent contour. And this reproduces the correct answer for the whatever correct, meaning whatever was predicted from the matrix model. Okay, so I think I'm running out of time now. So let me conclude. So in conclusion, I'd say that string field theory gives a systematic procedure for computing perturbative and d-instanton contribution to the amplitudes. And now that we have learned the techniques, okay, we should be able to calculate this procedure you apply this procedure to calculate d-instanton amplitudes in situations where S duality may not be of help. In particular, one case where the d-instanton contributions are important is in n equal to 1 supersymmetric compactifications, because often d-instanton amplitudes, d-instanton contributions generate non-perturbative superpotential that's useful for both moduli stabilization as well as for computing various Yukawa type couplings in the resulting 4-dimensional effective field theory. So these are practical applications. And one may hope perhaps that once we learn the instanton contributions properly, we may also find a non-perturbative definition of string theory of researches. Because the idea is that if we understand how to compute the full perturbation series around each topologically non-trivial instanton sector, then perhaps resurgence will allow us to complete the theory into a full non-perturbative description. Okay, so I think I'll stop here. I think my 35 minutes are up. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions locally or?
Hi, Ashok.
Hi.
Can I ask you about more concretely what else can be now computed, for example, in the 10-dimensional superstring theory, like the effective action? What terms can we compute after Green and Gutterpole terms? Yeah.
So in 10-dimensional superstring theory, what will happen is, for example, that if we take the calculation that I described was for R to the 4. But once the normalization has been determined, we can compute, say, d to the 4 R to the 4 and d to the 6 R to the 4 results. These are also predicted in the early days of string theory. And these, in fact, have already been checked. The leading order, okay, Harvard group has already checked. Okay, in fact, they checked that the ratio of the d to the 4 R to the 4 and d to the 6 R to the 4 to the R to the 4 works out correctly. And the normalization, of course, is the same for all of these amplitudes. So now that we have fixed the normalization, that also shows that those results also work out correctly. Now you may ask, what can you do that S duality couldn't do? And here, for example, if you want the d to the 8 R to the 4 corrections, okay, which is two extra power of derivative or 2 extra power of momentum in the amplitude, there S duality has nothing to say because it's not protected. But again, the Harvard group has actually computed those, right? In fact, they have got the exact analog of the Venetian amplitude, okay, which has all parts of derivative to leading order in the string count. So all those you can compute now in 10-dimensional string theory. I would say that any d-instanton contribution to the amplitude you can in principle now compute.
But is then the idea that you sum up all of these contributions and apply some resurgence to really find the complete non-perturbative description of the theory, or what's the vision there? How far can you push this?
Yeah, so that's the vision, that once you understand all of these, right, and how to generate perturbation series, maybe this could give some way to define the theory by resurgence. And of course, one bottleneck, okay, which is not there in the 10-dimensional type 2B string theory, but in lower dimension, one bottleneck is that the NS5 brane contribution, NS5 brane instanton contribution has not been understood yet fully. But in 10 dimensions, you don't have that. So in 10-dimensional type 2B string theory, the hope is that once you have understood each topological sector carefully, maybe resurgence in principle can give you a full definition of string theory.
Ashok, I also have a quick question. So maybe this is a bit naive, but in minimal string theory, there is also known matrix model duals for these effects, and they're somehow related to FZZT branes, non-perturbative target space of the FZZT brane. Can you understand that, or in fact, maybe is that already completely understood and it's not that interesting?
Yeah, I think FZZT brane, the point is they change asymptotic space-time. So they really are correspond to different vacuum of the thing. And I think certainly a lot of study has been done, again recently by the Harvard group on FZZT branes, but they are not directly related to what we are doing here, because here the kind of instantons you're talking about are the ones that do not change the asymptotic structure of space-time, right? You fix the asymptotic structure, and then you compute the full Euclidean path integral with that fixed asymptotic boundary condition.
I see. And somehow the changing the asymptotics would be more challenging, or could you adopt your techniques?
No, I think it will not be more challenging. It will be different in the sense that you have to first decide on which sector you want to work in, right? So let's suppose that you have FCCT branes. We put in certain number of FCCT branes, but then that's fixed.
Yes.
Okay, and then you can again start doing the instanton computation on top of that background. And there again, I would think that these techniques will be helpful. And the only extra ingredient, of course, is now the modes of the d-instanton will also include open strings that connect the d-instanton to the FCCT branes.
Yeah, exactly.
Those modes have to be taken into account. But I don't see that there is any.
Looked a little bit like these chi modes that you had. I mean, that would be similar. To incorporate them, that would be somehow like these chi modes that you had in your talk.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Chi modes, there may be extra stringy mode, extra bosonic modes. See, the point is, okay, maybe I can go back a little bit. You see, here we are lucky because all the massive states cancelled. But even if they didn't cancel, it doesn't really matter because those are finite integrals. You can do this, right? If you cannot do it analytically, you can put it on a computer and evaluate it. It's only the massless modes and the tachyonic modes which you have to deal with separately. So if we take a d-instanton in the presence of an FCCT branes, the massive modes you can evaluate explicitly, okay, by performing these integrals, and you have to convert the integration over the tachyonic modes and the zero modes into the language of string field theory and try to make sense of this.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I don't see any more questions locally. Are there any questions in the chat? I don't see any. If not, let's thank Ashok again for a very nice talk.
Thank you very much.